Welcome everyone to Dash Day 2. Thanks, Tolly, for this amazing talk. I really, really like the talk, and actually, it's amazing what your team achieved in a year. It's also matches very well what we have the goal of Dash, which is speed up and scale up, which is perfect because this is exactly what you need to do. So thanks for sharing that story. So a little bit of things. We want to be this as interactive as possible. So feel free to use the chat to discuss among your peers, whatever. And also use a tab to ask questions. So we are going to be picking questions from there. So don't be shy. Ask as many questions as possible. As you've seen, Tolly is an expert on bringing observability into organizations. So take the opportunity to ask him questions. Okay, so let's start with the first question. So when you made the decision of moving to serverless, you had a completely different tech stack, and was any of that stack reusable, or was this really a greenfield project from zero?
Well, first of all, Lara, thanks for having me. It's been a great kind of journey for us, and I'm quite excited to kind of tell our story. I'm really looking forward to feedback, kind of anyone having any ideas of whether we're doing anything completely wrong or whether we have any better approaches. I guess it's a very good question. We didn't start from Greenfield Project, and it was quite brave for us to as a business to migrate from one cloud to the other. So we're entirely in Azure. We did have a handful of APIs that were supporting the front end. And we decided to build anything new in AWS. We didn't kind of replicate what we had. We just said, right, anything new for this new project, we'll entirely build it in AWS. And we put the existing service in maintenance mode. So it helped us a lot that we had that experience, that we had some cloud experience, because a lot of the concepts and patterns and practices are very they transfer. I think in terms of technology, we kept Gatsby React, so that didn't really change, and the hosting is not that much different from what it was in Azure. But I guess the things that we probably learned the most is that we learned about deployment patterns with Azure DevOps, and when we moved to GitHub Actions, we learned what not to do, what approaches would work. And the other thing I guess to call out is that we did learn from the observability perspective. So we did instrument our services, our APIs in Azure quite efficiently. So we started learning all this kind of observability thing quite early on, and we got quite a bit of experience from that. I mean, personally, that's where I started, and a lot of those concepts do transfer.
Cute.
I think that's it.
Yes, so maybe a greenfield project from a tech point of view, but not from a learning curve point of view. I really like how you always mention that these software projects are also people related, which is fantastic to see. So we got the first question from the audience, so we are going to pick that one, and a little bit related to more specific technology. So they want clarification on whether you're using X-ray for tracing instrumentation, or are you using something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We started when we first launched. We had about 6 months to launch the new version of the website ultimately, and we started using Datadog. We were using Datadog in Azure, but we were rushing to deliver everything, so we didn't quite get to actually use Datadog efficiently when we first launched. So initially, we did use X-ray and CloudWatch, and dashboards in CloudWatch as well, so that we had some level of observability. So we didn't when I said in the talk we weren't great in performance and operating our software, it wasn't that bad. It's just we weren't mature enough. So initially we did use X-ray, but right now I'd say 95% of the organization uses Datadog. We feel native observability tools and services are not as kind of broad and mature as kind of dedicated ones. So currently we use it very, very little, I'd say. So we use APM, we use Datadog tracing, we use metrics, and the various integrations to some extent between AWS and Datadog. That's been quite key throughout the journey. But I guess our direction of travel is to use one rather than two, I'd say. I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it does. Thank you. So the next question from the audience comes from Sarah. They were asking, and I think this is very important. They want a little bit to dive a little bit deeper on the node platform kind of organization, and no SRE, no teams, and the ability to have this DevOps community of practice. And I see that at the end of your talk, you said that in the end you're going to have some platform team or tools team specific. So how do you think, after all you've learned, how do you think is the best way to balance between having specific teams to leverage so teams can leverage that knowledge without going and evolving back to rely on a fully ops team? So how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. I think initially when we started out, when we started small, and especially as we scaled, it does help to take away things, because the thing I often say to squads is that there's no one else who's going to support their software systems in production. There's no one else who's going to test their software. So we don't have QAs at all either. So it almost kind of puts the onus on them to be kind of have a truly DevOps mindset and care about the entire life cycle of their software. And that way, kind of taking away with that constraint, you squads actually learn quite well to some of these concepts and patterns and practices. As we're scaling, we are finding there are some things that we don't want squads to be working with. And for example, infrastructure. So we're kind of evolving our AWS account structure or our IAM strategies. And that's almost kind of offered by a dedicated platform squad, if you like. We call it the part of a tribe that we call TechOps. And that's helped a lot to kind of take away that work and not make it visible to the squads, but use the squads as customers almost. So we do have a bit of that. The community of practice has come in and helped us a lot with sharing knowledge and sharing purpose. So our first community of practice, especially in the engineering space, is around DevOps and observability, and where we had these dedicated engineers embedded in each team working on all these things for their team, and we had silos. We're now kind of sharing that knowledge and having a common purpose, and maybe having a common theme that they're working on, and working as a team, but more about sharing rather than working on the same thing. To answer the question, it's hard to strike that balance. But I think we kind of went a bit the other way around, and now we're providing support with this community.
So following up on that, what would you be your recommendation for teams who are have seen this talk and say, okay, I think creating a DevOps community of practice in my organization could be a good idea? What would you be your recommendation on how to start?
Create a safe space to start with. Make sure that people are happy to share with each other, are happy to help each other. Make sure that people get to know each other. And create a shared purpose. If people don't see the purpose, don't buy in, then there's no community. So that's important. Interestingly, might be controversial. Online has been quite hard for us from that perspective to build those relationships and build that common purpose. So meeting in person that we started recently doing yesterday, we had an all-day workshop, has done wonders. But ultimately, I think create a safe space and work on understanding what are their needs. Think about their hopes and their fears. I mean, one of the things worth calling out is that we have hired a head of engineering practices, and we're looking to evolve that through communities and through common groupings of people doing things. So we're almost like organizationally designing for it. It's not something that happens on the side. It's not a. I think initially we started with guilds, but they worked to an extent, but then they start breaking down. So having a more structured approach and with a dedicated leader potentially, that helps a lot. So I would kind of bring that journey, those people along that journey, that are part of that community. When we're talking about
Yeah,
the DevOps
that's a
one.
that's a very good suggestion. Maybe it doesn't have to be someone with a specific title, but having a person or a group of 2-3 people there really leading the way is very useful. Good. So another question from the audience. Brian is asking, you mentioned relying more on SLOs than monitors. Was it a challenge to review the monitor gaps and utilize SLOs to fill this?
Yeah, so I guess I think I mentioned we fell into the trap of monitoring everything, and techniques from SRE that might help us. It might be SLOs or might be chaos days that we do a lot. Help us understand what is the service that we're offering to customers. So help us come closer to customers. So engineers typically might think about, okay, is my health check there for my API? I need a health check for every API, but actually you might not care about every API. What you want to care more about is what the customer is experiencing. So we try and do kind of workshops around this and try and understand what is our service, what failure modes that impact customers might the squad or the team as a whole needs to know about and needs to look into monitor. SLOs are a hard one. We've got some SLOs. I wouldn't say that we've got massive success with them so far. We're on a journey, but I think they frame the right type of conversation around what is a service we're offering, what do we deem as acceptable, and thinking about the customer rather than monitoring everything. Because monitor fatigue is real, is completely real. So we need to cater for it.
So following up on that, on alert fatigue, so you mentioned at the beginning you started creating a lot of monitors and that brought a lot of alert fatigue to the teams. What were your solutions to that? So how did you overcome that challenge?
So I think it's more about what we monitor and kind of maybe have a classification of, if it's a P1 and have, or a P2, and kind of know when we need to do things. That's where SLOs come in with our budgets potentially, that we can say we can alert for. That's a future thing we can alert for. But what we've done so far is distribute the responsibility. Tech leads in each team seem to, naturally, as their personalities are, they will kind of take lead and protect the team and do respond to monitors too much. And a lot of the teams have got an in-hours rota, so people take time and kind of, okay, so this alert went off, what can I do? Shall I go and have a look? And then in the process of looking, you also start to get curious and start to explore your telemetry data. And that's a very important practice to have and understand your production systems. So by distributing that, I think you get a better kind of collective understanding, and you make that collective cognitive shift from building software, writing code, delivering, to actually looking into production a bit more.
Good. So another question from the audience. This is again very, very practical, very technical question. Someone who doesn't have a name, anonymous, is asking whether you're using any sort of infrastructure as code to manage your infrastructure.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we started from ARM templates, so JSON, which was all infrastructure as code and some bash scripts, and we moved to serverless framework. So we built our initial version of the new website in AWS using serverless framework, which kind of started us off quite well, but then we hit boundaries. We hit the boundaries of that, and most of the new components and services in the backend are using CDK right now, which means that we've got TypeScript across our stack, if you like. So front end, back end, and infrastructure is all TypeScript. So I think we've kind of gone away from the infrastructure as code model of YAML or JSON or any other language. It's our normal proper programming language with unit testing in place, and anyone can do it now. It's truly anyone can do it rather than it being an anti-pattern. It's one of those things that we learned from our Azure experience, and it's nothing to do with Azure. It's more about that infrastructure as code was built with JSON and ARM templates, and although you can get used to them, I did get used to them. You need to spend time to understand them, whereas there's a lower kind of entry point for TypeScript CDK.
Cool. So we are running out of time, but I think we still have time for a couple more questions. So going back to observability, you mentioned that when you launch 2.0 at the beginning, it wasn't, things weren't going that great in production, so observability wasn't that good back then. So what were the challenges? What were the problems? Were the teams not finding the information that they needed? There were not enough telemetry. What was the issue?
I think it was the cognitive overhead. When I mentioned the cognitive load shift towards observability and monitoring and operational performance in production, that wasn't the time for us to do it. You have to think, when we migrated, we had to migrate to AWS. We had to learn serverless, learn event-driven, scale at the same time in terms of people and teams, meet aggressive deadlines while maintaining existing websites. So a lot of learning points. So observability didn't quite work out as we would like for the initial launch. But I mean, it wasn't bad. We still had CloudWatch and X-Ray. We still had dashboards. And we had distributed responsibility of ops across the teams. So we were doing well. But I think what we learned is that ops using this DevOps model takes time to mature in an organization. It's not like you can switch it on. It's more about familiarity with observability, monitoring, and SRE concepts. And it's about maturity with working with the software we develop, but at the same time, the observability tooling we use. So I guess even now we have teams at different levels of maturity, but overall, I think we're at a pretty mature level. And I think having a separate observability and monitoring platform to AWS that's a lot richer than cloud native solutions, it's a massive help. So I guess initially I'd say that we didn't have the kind of Datadog configuration that we'd like and the familiarity, whereas now we do. So that's helped a lot.
Good. So just quickly, last question related to this. So from a personal point of view, what you would have wished to know before when you started, what you've learned in this couple of years in this journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I learned a lot, I guess. We learned that observability is harder than we think, but I would say it's not for the technical reasons that much. That's becoming easier as the industry is maturing, and it's maturing at a fast pace. I think it's more about the kind of socio-technical aspects of the problem. So observability and reliability is not a standard item on CVs, if you like. So for most engineers, a lot of time concepts and the tooling are new. It was new to me when I started. So everything, the patterns, the practices, it's all kind of new, but it's the true DevOps mindset, and it enables that. If I could change one thing, it would be to agree on a golden path or a blueprint, if you like, faster. So earlier in our journey, I think we're getting to it now, but it's not easy to kind of get to that. But I'd like to achieve that earlier. But again, it's all about the socio-technical aspect, and I think that needs working with people and seeing. I think a lot of people have mentioned this. People need to see tracing working, for example, to buy into it, and that's definitely something we've learned. So get it working, I guess. Get your service boundary right in DevOps in Datadog is a more specific thing I would do earlier.
Good. Thanks a lot, Tolly. Thanks for this amazing talk and the discussion. It's been a pleasure, and I hope the rest of you, thanks for attending, and enjoy the rest of Dash. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks all. Enjoy.